Hello, I'm Tom Mackin. Welcome to Viewpoints. In this student thesis series, I have the pleasure of actually interviewing one of my students, Don Simko. He's going to be talking about the role of autonomous vehicles in expanding infrastructure capacity in the country. Welcome, Don.
Thank you, Tom.
Good to see you. So I want to know a little bit about your thesis. I want to explain what motivated it and what made you first think about pursuing this topic.
I began investigating infrastructure because of a curiosity I had about just the aging infrastructure and our lack as a nation of doing much about repairing it. I wanted to see where we were and what was going on and some potential solutions to some of the challenges. So in my investigation, I found that there were a lot of agencies and groups of engineers and scientists investigating this problem, and all came to the same conclusion that we definitely need to do something. So I wanted to isolate, instead of looking at all infrastructure and everything possible in the country, just down to one sector. So I started with transportation. I looked at that, and specifically, I kind of narrowed my way down to roadway infrastructure. The figures that I found and the facts that I was able to gather, they showed us that there's the majority of cargo that's moved through the United States is moved over interstate roads, and that congestion, just normal congestion, nothing to do with weather or disaster events or anything else, costs the country billions of dollars every year in lost productivity, lost fuel, all sorts of things like that.
So is it getting worse? Is congestion getting worse?
It is getting worse. It's estimated in the next 20 to 30 years, we're going to add another 25 to 30 million registered vehicles to what we already have.
Wow.
Urban density is increasing. All the factors that motivate congestion are just going to get worse. Mm-hmm. So this is a problem that's definitely going to get worse. Many large urban areas have investigated ways of trying to stop congestion or slow it down or mitigate the causes of it. Things like high occupancy vehicle lanes, things like selective congestion tolling, mm-hmm. where prices of road tolls will increase or decrease based on usage. Mm-hmm. So they're trying to motivate people to not use the roadways during peak times of congestion.
How effective have those solutions been?
Minimally. There was some research that's been done back in the 60s where they've talked about the general laws of traffic congestion. And if you make it easier for people to drive or reduce congestion, more people then are motivated to drive. And it's this sort of balancing out factor.
Right.
Well, you can do it through tolling or some sort of regulation of how many people can travel in so many lanes. You can build more roadway. You can add alternate routes. And the outcome is always the same. You maintain about the same general level of congestion.
Wow.
So the factor, after doing this investigation, that I found the commonality of all this congestion, it isn't as much the designs of the roadways, the amount of cars. It was more of a human behavioral thing. The majority of roadway congestion is based on human interactions, human decisions, and the fact that they really can't see much of their surroundings. Right. You see the car in front of you, maybe two cars ahead, one behind, and any perturbation of that overall transpo system gets magnified as you add more vehicles to a roadway.
That's an interesting thing, because they do have very limited ability to know what's going on
Yes.
on the roadway, but have these new interesting maps that provide people alternative routes when they're on. Do you know if that's had any important effect in any way on reducing congestion?
It allows people to navigate around some if there's an accident or if there's a slowdown, to try to navigate around that. But it goes back to the earlier law of congestion. Now we're just going to put more people.
Right.
Everybody now knows that there's a quick route, and that's going to be quickly congested as well.
Right. So it sounds to me like you're saying it's basically a human problem.
It's a human problem.
And so what do we do about it?
That's what led me to autonomous vehicles. So I looked at some other public transportation, high-speed rail sorts of solutions. And again, a lot of these groups of engineers that are investigating these things came to this sort of same conclusion that just like building more roads, it's not going to be the right fix of what we need. Changing driver behavior is really what would eliminate most of the normal, non-accident related, non-construction related congestion. That's going to be hard. You can't change people's minds. But the way in which autonomous vehicles are controlled, and in the future, once they can be linked together and communicate with each other, instead of having individual vehicles moving along a roadway, now we can have a network and a system of smart vehicles that can communicate to each other at a much greater distance. And these small little slow down, speed up perturbations that you would have can be spread across the entire system instead of impacting and slowing everything down in one spot.
I mean, it makes total sense. In fact, if you can daisy chain the information from vehicle to vehicle, then there's no limit to how far ahead you can do your planning in some ways.
Right. And the control systems in these vehicles will be able to spread that out and share that information, and we can have a more streamlined overall system. Instead of a collection of individuals, we could have an actual transportation system with vehicles.
Right.
We wouldn't have to invest much more with building new roads, building new rail lines, a lot of the other solutions, purchasing additional vehicles. That the cost of getting this technology out into the country is going to be spread through the individual vehicle purchasers, whether it's commercial or whether they're individuals.
Do we have to redesign roadways with extra sensors or other systems to help enable the intelligence of these autonomous vehicles?
No, not in all cases.
Okay.
There is the ability for, and it's being tested and worked on, vehicles to communicate to other vehicles. There have been several states that have already put together some initiatives where they're going to put some sensors into roadways to enable testing of this vehicle to infrastructure communication.
Right.
And then you can have vehicles that can talk to both infrastructure and other cars. So the majority of America on your large, vast interstate systems in the heartland of the country, the vehicle-to-vehicle would probably be sufficient. If you're in dense urban areas, you're in New York, you're in Chicago, you're in Los Angeles, then maybe some infrastructure additions would be useful. But most of the technology can be self-contained inside these vehicles.
Right. So do you see some interesting overlaps of various infrastructure sectors, though? Because we're now going to be adding additional communication requirements.
Yes.
And so we have communication needs, and I think we want to make sure that communication is secure.
There's a huge security concern, but before we even get that far, I think we just need to standardize what frequencies.
Okay.
How are they going to communicate? In what manner? Since many auto manufacturers are already working on this and testing and designing, how are we going to make sure that your Chevrolet talks to your Volvo or your Toyota, especially when they're different nations that are going to be involved in building this technology? When it's the simple autonomous vehicle that can control itself, that's one thing. But when we're talking these networks and these systems of vehicles that could be very dissimilar, but we want to link together, we have to ensure that there's a good communication channel and a compatibility of operating systems as well. Otherwise, we lose all the benefits that we can gain by putting them together.
Right. So based upon your research, you sort of feel like this is a viable solution to extending the lifetime of our existing infrastructure?
Yes. The calculations that we put together and the mathematical models that we built showed that even with very simple putting 5 vehicles or 10 vehicles together, it can increase between 300 and 500% capacity increases.
Oh, the platooning effect, if you have vehicles moving together,
would greatly increase what we already have. So if you're looking at figures of, okay, we may add 20% more vehicles in the next 20 or 30 years, but this technology can give us a 300% capacity increase, we're okay. We can keep up with where the society is going.
Okay, so here comes the oracle part of the interview. What do you think? How long is it going to take before we start to implement these in a measurable way where we might see some impact on roadway congestion?
The way the industry is designing and starting to roll out some of the smaller autonomous features, some of the experts in the lobbying groups that have put information out there are saying by 2050, we could have a majority adoption of this amount of technology.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay.
So we could do that. And then when you look at just the regular replacement rate of vehicles, people have an old car, it gets old, it starts breaking, they buy something new. Many of these features are becoming standard, much like safety belts became standard, airbags became standard. Now autonomous braking assists, lane keeping, these little factors are starting to be built into the cars. The full autonomous, where the vehicle can drive itself, was very dependent on the hardware as for price, the sensors themselves, the computer, the AI that was going to run this vehicle. The sensors are drastically reducing. In the past 2 years, they've gone from the sensor package was around $70,000 per vehicle. They were able to get some of the sensors, just the lasers and the optical scanners, down to around $500 per vehicle.
Right.
And with the advances in computing technology, we keep increasing power and reducing size and price. That's going to catch up too.
So is there going to be a hurdle though? Is there going to be an adoption hurdle if things like, when there was the accident involving the Tesla, did that have any effect on people's feelings about the technology and the reliability of the technology?
The ethics of it are definitely going to be a concern. Regarding the Tesla accident, there were a lot more factors involved than just the failure of the technology. The technology was still very new. It wasn't a fully autonomous vehicle. It had a lot of what the industry is sort of considering an autopilot system, where it can do some things by itself, but the driver still has to be active and engaged.
Yeah, it's not a fully autonomous system.
And in this case, there was issues with the sun was coming up and there was a white truck and the sensors were confused. The driver probably, with the sun went in his eyes, he wasn't able to see it anyway. Whether it was autonomous or not, it was probably the right set of circumstances that any driver would have gotten into an accident. Mm-hmm. But that does play into. That was the arguments that people that were afraid of this technology through that one, that was their first go-to argument is, oh, well, this isn't going to work. People, are going to be, in jeopardy. So
you're saying by 2050 adoption, I mean, does it happen sort of at the same rate? I remember hybrids, it was the same thing. I mean, Toyota introduced the hybrid and it was at first just a cutesy thing that only certain people would buy, and it's all over the marketplace now. Many manufacturers have them. Are we going to follow the same sort of path?
I think we are. That's the safety features that are starting to be put into the vehicles where we have some of this autopilot and driver assistance sort of things are going to segue directly into some of that more autonomous. And as we're putting more and more controls and more sensors, we're getting closer for the ability for these vehicles to do everything themselves.
So I have another question from you, sort of like social question. There's driver enthusiasts out there who love high-performance vehicles. What happens to the driver enthusiast in an autonomous vehicle system?
That is, again, another hurdle that we're going to have to address as a society and where we want to go. There have been some lobbying groups. I haven't been able to find a lot of things where they've written it down and put it in print, but radio interviews that I've heard with varying lobbyist groups that are pushing towards autonomous vehicles are taking the stance of human error is what is causing roadway accidents. We need to get rid of it. Humans shouldn't be allowed to drive cars. So you're going to run into that. These car enthusiasts, there's a whole string of old science fiction movies about how cars were outlawed and people were
it seems like
bracing against
it's
that.
An interesting thing. You're basically denying a liberty. It sounds like if it's taken that way.
In a certain manner, but it isn't anything that we haven't seen in the country before. Horseback was the major transportation mode in the country for a very large part of our history. As automobiles came and took over, you can't ride your horse on the interstate. But if you are a horse enthusiast, you can own a horse. There's still horse racing. There's all of the things that we sort of liked. They've turned into a hobby instead of our major mode of transportation. Okay. We could do the exact same thing we could still have the Indianapolis 500. You could still have your classic car club. It would be more of a hobby than this is your major transportation.
But how long do we allow enthusiast drivers to occupy the same roadways as the autonomous vehicles? Do we, at some point, that's what you're sort of saying about the horses, at some point you have to keep them off that?
That you do. There's going to have to be a break. And I think that is going to be based on that adoption rate when we get there. And this is going to be a state and sometimes local decision about when are we going to restrict and allow vehicles. Even with an automobile, if you have a Model T and it can't travel at the minimum highway speeds, you can't use it on the highway, but you can use it on a city street.
Yeah, okay.
And we're going to find that's probably the same way the distinction is going to go.
Do you have one last thing I want to ask you is just about the thesis process itself. Do you
Yes.
have, I mean, how did that work out for you? Do you have any advice for any other students, actually?
You need to be flexible with your idea and follow the evidence and follow where things go, and don't be discouraged. I had some ideas starting the process, and I found that some folks have already come up with some solutions. So that was my where I wanted to go with my thesis. Somebody had already done it, which was fine. Just had to change direction slightly and go in a different direction. And I was open to the fact that after we did some modeling, this may not be a good solution, which I would have had to address it that way too.
So do you have a single takeaway that on autonomous vehicles? Is there any one thing you can condense it down to for? What did you learn, perhaps?
What did I learn?
What's the thing that sticks out in your mind?
That they're definitely just the interest in the private sector, the market, auto manufacturers, technological companies, transportation companies. They're very interested in this, and it is coming. Whether citizens or states or local governments are resistant to this, they're coming to a roadway near you pretty soon for a lot of economic reasons.
Okay, Don.
And that's going to happen.
All right, Don, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom.